So you've probably heard me ramble out this every single time I teach a move, but I'll repeat it again for the sake of the intro. You don't have to do your moves all in one go, which is where Roger Klaus's concept of half moves actually come to play, because it's actually a very simple magic theory, magic concept, magic idea, but I think it goes a long way to help you sort of understand certain types of moves and also just improve the quality of your performances in general. So the idea of a half move is actually relatively simple. Basically, it comes down to a sleight of hand technique can be sort of broken down into smaller blocks, more manageable blocks, and sort of blocks that you can sort of control depending on what you want to do in your routines and performances in general. So let's try and give a relatively simple example. So if we take a look at a very classical sleight, for example, the DPS, the diagonal palm shift, if you take a look at it and you dissect it, it's actually multiple steps that, when added together, make what we know as the DPS. So, for example, let's take a look at what are the steps of a DPS, right? Fundamentally, a DPS is let's just say an in jog. A DPS is an in jog. You then kick it off to the side, and then there's the palming action, right? But all of these are actually their own distinct moments that, when chained together, make the DPS. But here's the thing. If you actually take a look at the DPS and all of these three little steps, these steps can actually be isolated. They can be made their own blocks. So here, if we take a look at in jogging the selection, right? I can stop here. That's one block. If I kick it off to the right, that's another block. And then when I wanted to, that's when I can actually do the palming action. And that is 3 half moves, right? One half move is the in jog. The other half move is kicking it off to the right. And then the last half move is the palming action itself, right? So that's 3 half moves. In fact, you probably already do some form of half moves yourself. Let's just think about your standard double lift. Unless you do a push-off double, right, which is just one step, right? If you actually do any sort of get ready, that's already a half move. Because if you think about it, right, most double lifts are actually just pinky count, right? You do your pinky count, and then you do whatever push-off that you want, right? But you typically wouldn't do the get ready right before you do your double. You would typically get your pinky break first, right? While you're talking with the audience, while you're just discussing with them or just doing small talk or whatever. And then when the time is ready, that's when you actually do your double lift, right? And that's a very basic example of you already using a half move in practice, because you're already breaking down a double lift into 2 distinct steps, into 2 distinct half moves. You're breaking it down into the get ready, you're talking, doing whatever, and then you're breaking it down into, right, the double, the turnover itself, and then you turn it back over, right? So that's already just a very simple sort of demonstration of a half move that you're already doing, right? So using that as an example, you can probably already guess what the main purpose of a half move is. Basically, it comes down to, it's just easier to avoid detection, right? If you break down sleights into multiple distinct blocks, it's sort of harder to sort of piece together what you're doing, because each moment is so far in between, right? So imagine, right? Let's just give another example. Imagine if people were burning their hands after selecting a card, right? After selecting a card, they were burning their hands. You wouldn't want to immediately execute a DPS immediately right after that, right? Because then, like, why would you palm the card when everyone else is looking into your hands, right? Especially if we're doing like a certain palming method, which has a lot of windows. You wouldn't exactly want to do a DPS after that. You would want to actually get the selection, and then you would actually in-jog the selection, and then you would pause, you would talk, and then when the time is ready, you can transfer the deck in your right hand. That's when you actually kick the card to the right, right? And then you can talk some more, do whatever, and then when you know that everyone's like eyes are off your hands, that's when you actually do the steal, right? So that is a great advantage of a half move, right? It's just being able to sort of separate those blocks and then sort of dictate the timing of the effect of each sleight. Because if we're doing a card to pocket, right? If you're doing a card to pocket and immediately after that you had to like palm the card and then you have to load it in, you're basically rushing through the effect. But for example, if you're taking your time, right? If you're breaking down every sleight by blocks, right? Then you can take your time, talk, right? You're already in your get ready, and then when the time is right, you palm the card, and then you finally reveal it, right? So all of these is to basically just help with breaking down the sleight into bits, sort of just to hide certain elements, right? To find a better timing for each sleight to be like optimally performed, and then that also helps you find sort of your pace, right? Because I think social media actually, one thing that I don't like about social media is that everything is always so fast paced. I think a lot of people sort of use those examples as to how magic is supposed to be presented, very rapid fire, effect after effect after effect. But in reality, a lot of effects can actually be sort of extended because it's conversational. There's no magic without the spectator. You have to communicate with them, right? Or at least that's how I typically perform. But yeah, so having half moves lets you dictate the pacing of the effect of the sleights, and it also aids you in avoiding detection. So those are just a couple of advantages for a half move, even though it's just something as stupidly simple as just separating the moments in a sleight, because then you're breaking up your performance. You're breaking up when a sleight is inherently done, so then you have to rush through certain parts. So you can choose when a half move is, when you pause, and when to continue. And that's what I really like about half moves. And that's half moves, right? It's such a simple concept, but it's such a stupidly like important one because you don't want to rush through every single one of your effects. So just having the idea of a half move is just, I don't know, it's just nice to sort of remind ourselves that sometimes rushing through things isn't necessarily the best. Sometimes you can break things up, slow down, and then just decide when you want to do things, because it's your performance. There we go. I don't know why I butchered that word, but it's your performance. You dictate the pace, and so yeah, I just really do enjoy the concept of half moves, and I think that this was an important video to put out, especially because a lot of people just tend to like just rush through controls, they rush through palms, and they rush through everything. But at the end of the day, there's no harm in slowing down. In fact, after the concept of half moves, I would actually recommend slowing down. You know, just talk with your audience members. It doesn't have to be with magic and all that stuff, right? You can tell a couple of jokes, it doesn't really matter. But that's the concept of half moves. And so I hope that you take a look at the sleights that you have, sort of understand where you can pause, where you can actually break it up, and then where each half move is. And then I hope that you can integrate that into your performances, where you can understand where certain things are. And yeah, wait, that sentence didn't make much sense, but yeah. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for the half moves. Yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, and hope you enjoyed the concept of half moves. See you guys next time.